I am Natalie, 33 years old. For 5 years, I secretly paid my parents' mortgage to keep a roof over their heads while my older brother played pretend CEO. I thought I was being a good daughter. Then 1 month after I finally stopped paying their bills, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. It did not say hello. It did not ask how I was doing. It just said, "The mortgage is due today. Transfer the funds immediately." I took a sip of my coffee, stared at the city skyline from my corner office, and typed my final reply. Ask your sole heir to pay it. Then I hit block. I had no idea this single text would ignite a brutal war that would end with my brother in handcuffs and my parents evicted from their own home. Before I dive into exactly how that happened, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace. To understand how we reached that explosive breaking point, you have to go back exactly 1 month. I run a highly successful commercial real estate investment firm. It is a grueling, cutthroat industry, but I built my portfolio from absolutely nothing. My parents, Richard and Patricia, never understood my career. To them, my older brother Harrison was the undeniable genius of the family. At 36, Harrison called himself a tech founder, which was essentially a polite way of saying he burned through hundreds of thousands of dollars on failed crypto scams. He had recently married Nia, an African-American woman who styled herself as a high-end lifestyle influencer. Nia's daily routine consisted of unboxing luxury bags, on-camera bags that were secretly funded by my parents. Between Harrison and his digital gambling and Nia and her designer habits, they were bleeding my parents dry. I had stopped by my parents' house on a rainy Tuesday evening because my father Richard, who is 65, complained his laptop was running slow. As the beautiful daughter, I sat at the dining room table running a diagnostic scan while he and my mother watched television in the living room. A document folder on his desktop caught my eye because it was simply titled Final Will and Testament, Updated. I normally respect boundaries, but a sharp gut feeling told me to open it. What I saw on that screen fundamentally altered my reality forever. The legal jargon was dense, but the distribution of assets was painfully clear. The house, their life savings, the family heirlooms, every single thing of value was left entirely to Harrison. I scrolled down rapidly, searching for my name. I found it on page 4, tucked away like an embarrassing afterthought. It stated that Natalie receives exactly $1 to prevent her from legally contesting the will in probate court. They had actually paid a lawyer to ensure I could not fight back. But it was the typed rationale beneath that clause that made my blood run cold. It read, Natalie will easily find a husband to provide for her needs. Harrison requires the financial foundation to build his empire. I sat there in the quiet dining room, the glowing screen illuminating my face, and read those words again. Harrison requires the financial foundation to build his empire. His empire consisted of losing money in fake digital coins and asking our parents to bail him out of debt. My parents were so deeply in denial about his massive failures that they were willing to completely disinherit me just to prop up his delusions. The staggering irony of it all made me want to laugh out loud. My parents believed they were securing a legacy for their golden boy. What they conveniently ignored was that I was the only reason they had a legacy left to pass on. 5 years ago, Richard made several disastrous financial investments that nearly bankrupted them. They were on the brink of losing the house to foreclosure. I stepped in anonymously through my business accounts. For half a decade, I had been paying their monthly mortgage, their property taxes, and their premium health insurance deductibles. I routed the money through a blind family trust account I set up so they would not feel like they were taking charity from their own daughter. They gladly took the money every month without ever questioning where it came from, assuming their old investments were finally paying off. They truly thought I was just a single woman wasting her life on a stressful career, assuming some imaginary future husband would swoop in to save me. They had no idea I was the one saving them. I did not scream. I did not storm into the living room and demand an explanation. Emotional outbursts were exactly what my mother Patricia expected from me. She loved calling me dramatic whenever I pointed out her blatant favoritism. I decided right then and there that I would not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, I smiled a very cold, calm smile. I closed the laptop, wiped my fingerprints off the keyboard, and walked into the living room. "Your computer is fixed, Dad," I said smoothly. My father barely looked away from the television screen. He just grunted a quick thanks and waved his hand dismissively. My mother did not even look up from her magazine. I walked out of my childhood home, got into my car, and pulled out my work laptop. Right there in their driveway, I logged into my private banking portal. I navigated to the automatic transfer section. I found the recurring payments for the mortgage, the property taxes, and the insurance premiums. With 3 quick clicks, I canceled all of them. The financial pipeline that had kept their illusion afloat was instantly severed. I felt a tremendous sense of liberation wash over me as I drove back to my city penthouse. For years, I had exhausted myself trying to earn their respect by secretly keeping them afloat. I realized that night that they would never respect me. They would only ever use me. So I decided to let Harrison and his imaginary empire pay the bills from now on. 2 weeks passed in complete silence. My parents did not call to check on me, nor did they reach out to ask how my business was performing. I knew the mortgage grace period was ticking away, but I focused entirely on closing a massive commercial real estate acquisition. Then my phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. It was Patricia. She did not ask if I was busy. She simply demanded my presence for a mandatory family dinner on Friday night. I agreed to go. A part of me, that foolish inner child who still hoped for a scrap of parental affection, thought maybe they wanted to thank me. Just 3 weeks prior, Richard had suffered a minor health scare requiring a battery of expensive cardiovascular tests. His premium insurance had a steep out-of-pocket deductible. I had quietly paid the $5,000 medical bill directly to the hospital so he would not have to stress over it. I drove to their suburban house expecting at least a casual nod of gratitude. I should have known better. I walked into the dining room and immediately felt the suffocating atmosphere of their manufactured reality. Nia was standing by the dining table holding her phone on a ring light tripod. She was recording a video for her followers, loudly boasting about her perfect in-laws and her luxurious pregnancy journey. Harrison sat at the head of the table swirling a glass of expensive scotch that I had undoubtedly paid for. He was actively ignoring his wife to refresh his cryptocurrency portfolio on his phone. My parents hovered around Nia like loyal servants. Patricia was fussing over the floral arrangement, while Richard kept offering Nia different appetizers. When they finally noticed me standing in the doorway, the warm smiles instantly vanished. Patricia gave me a tight nod and pointed to the chair furthest from the head of the table. We sat down to eat. The conversation flowed exactly as I expected. Harrison spent 20 uninterrupted minutes bragging about his tech startup. He used buzzwords like blockchain integration and disruptive paradigms to mask the fact that his company generated zero actual revenue. My parents hung on his every word, treating his absolute financial garbage like a masterclass in modern economics. Not once did anyone ask about my day. Not once did Richard mention the $5,000 hospital bill I had cleared for him. Instead, as the dessert plates were being cleared, the real reason for my invitation was finally revealed. Richard cleared his throat and folded his hands on the table. He looked at me with his signature authoritative glare. "We have a family matter to discuss," he announced. "As you know, Harrison is aggressively scaling his tech venture. All of his liquid capital is currently tied up in server acquisitions and marketing algorithms. It is a critical growth phase." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. I knew exactly where this was going, and I prompted flatly. Patricia leaned forward, her face stretched into a painfully fake smile. "Well, Nia is pregnant with the first grandchild of this family. She needs a reliable, incredibly safe vehicle for her appointments and for transporting the baby. They have selected a fully loaded Tesla Model X. It is the only sensible choice for a modern mother with a public profile to maintain." I looked at Nia. She was busy admiring her fresh manicure, acting as if she deserved a luxury vehicle simply for existing. "That sounds nice," I replied. I am sure the dealership will be happy to accept Harrison's signature on the financing agreement. The temperature in the room plummeted. Harrison scoffed loudly and rolled his eyes. My capital is deployed, he snapped impatiently. The dealership wants a cosigner with a massive verifiable corporate income history to secure the premium interest rate. Dad is retired. We need you to co-sign the loan documents. The paperwork is already printed in the living room. It will only take you 2 minutes to sign. They did not ask. They demanded. They genuinely expected me to put my pristine corporate credit on the line to finance a luxury car for an unemployed influencer and a failed crypto bro. I set my glass down on the coaster. I am not co-signing a loan for a $100,000 vehicle, I stated evenly. If Harrison cannot afford the monthly payments, Nia can drive something more aligned with your actual household income. Nia immediately slammed her hands on the table. The performance for her internet followers was gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered entitlement. She glared at me aggressively, rubbing her barely visible pregnant belly. Since you are single and clearly not starting a family anytime soon, you simply do not know how expensive babies are. Nia sneered. Her voice dripped with condescension. You have zero real responsibilities. Harrison needs his capital for his tech startup. He is building an empire for our child. The absolute least you can do is help your brother provide a safe environment for his growing family instead of hoarding your money like a bitter spinster. The silence that followed was heavy. I looked at Richard. I looked at Patricia. I waited for them to correct her, to defend me, to say absolutely anything to acknowledge the profound disrespect I had just endured in their home. Patricia just sighed and looked at me with intense disappointment. Your sister-in-law is right, she muttered. You have no dependents. Family helps family. Why must you always make things so difficult? There it was, the ultimate confirmation of my place in their hierarchy. I was merely a wallet and ATM they could abuse and insult as long as it kept spitting out cash. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or defend my life choices. I did not mention the $5,000 medical bill or the 5 years of mortgage payments. Arguing would imply that their opinions carried weight. It would give them the dramatic reaction they were desperately trying to provoke. Instead, I smiled. It was a calm, terrifyingly peaceful smile. I picked up my linen napkin, delicately wiped the corners of my mouth, and placed it neatly beside my untouched dessert plate. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and looked directly at Nia. Enjoy the walk to your appointments, I said softly. Without another word, I turned my back on them and walked out of the dining room. I could hear Harrison shouting something angry behind me, but his voice sounded tiny and insignificant. I opened the front door, stepped out into the crisp evening air, and walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. The engine remained off. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my phone. I opened my private banking application and navigated to the authorized user section of my accounts. Years ago, I had issued 3 high-limit secondary credit cards tied directly to my primary corporate account. One for Richard, one for Patricia, and one for Harrison. They were supposed to be for absolute emergencies only. Naturally, they had slowly morphed into slush funds for luxury dinners, golf club fees, and designer shopping sprees. I had tolerated the financial abuse because I believed keeping the peace was better than facing their wrath. Not anymore. The peace was dead. I selected Richard's card, deactivated. I selected Patricia's card, deactivated. I selected Harrison's card, deactivated. I watched the screen refresh, confirming that the financial lifelines had been successfully severed. They wanted to treat me like a bitter, isolated spinster with zero responsibilities. I decided to show them exactly how responsible I could be with my own wealth. I started my car, pulled out of their driveway, and drove back to the city, ready to let the collateral damage begin. The collateral damage did not take long to materialize. Exactly 48 hours after I drove away from their house, the financial guillotine snapped shut. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a zoning permit when my phone screen illuminated. A mutual acquaintance had forwarded me a screen recording of Nia's latest Instagram live broadcast. I clicked play out of sheer morbid curiosity. The video showed Nia standing at the checkout counter of the flagship Gucci boutique downtown. She looked immaculate in a tailored maternity dress, posing for the camera with a manufactured pout. She rambled to her 50,000 followers about how Harrison insisted on only the absolute best for their upcoming baby. With a theatrical flick of her wrist, she handed a sleek black credit card to the sales associate. I recognized the card immediately. It was the secondary corporate line I had deactivated on Friday night. The associate swiped the card. A sharp negative beep echoed through the video. The associate smiled apologetically and explained that the card was declined. Nia laughed nervously, blaming a bank error, and told the associate to try it again. The associate inserted the chip. Another harsh beep rang out. The associate then informed Nia loudly enough for the microphone to catch every word that the account was entirely deactivated. The comment section on the livestream exploded with laughing emojis and brutal mockery. Nia's face flushed crimson with absolute humiliation. She snatched the card back, muttered an excuse about fraudulent activity, and abruptly ended the broadcast. 10 minutes later, my personal cell phone began ringing frantically. The caller ID displayed Harrison's name. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. He called again. I let it ring. On the fourth attempt, I pressed accept and placed the phone on speaker, setting it down on my polished oak desk. I did not say hello. Harrison's voice blasted through the speaker, breathless with unhinged rage. "You vindictive, jealous spinster," he screamed. "You deactivated my corporate card. Nia just got publicly humiliated in front of thousands of people at the Gucci store. She is pregnant and crying in her car right now. How dare you cut off my financial access without warning?" I leaned back in my leather executive chair. "You demanded I co-sign a $100,000 car loan because your capital was tied up," I replied, my voice dangerously flat. I simply assumed a brilliant tech founder would have his own personal credit cards to pay for a $3,000 diaper bag. Using your sister's corporate emergency card for luxury shopping seems like a poor business paradigm. Harrison let out a furious roar. "You owe this family," he yelled. "You are a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand seeing me happy and building a legacy. You turn that card back on right now, or I swear to God." I reached forward and tapped the red button. I did not block his number yet. I wanted to see exactly how far they would escalate the situation. I did not have to wait long. Less than an hour after hanging up on Harrison, the heavy glass doors of my executive suite flew open. My receptionist, a sharp young woman named Vanessa, stood up abruptly from her desk. Richard and Patricia stormed into the reception area, completely ignoring protocol. My father's face was a mask of pure purple rage. My mother trailed closely behind him, clutching her purse tightly against her chest, glaring at the sleek surroundings of my commercial real estate office, as if the wealth I had built was a personal insult to her. Vanessa tried to stop them. "Excuse me, sir, you cannot just walk in here," she stated firmly. "Do you have an appointment?" Richard pointed a trembling finger directly at Vanessa. "I do not need an appointment to see my own daughter," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the marble floors. He pushed past the reception area and marched straight toward my glass-walled office. I watched him approach without moving a single muscle. I stood up slowly and opened my office door, stepping out into the lobby. Several of my analysts had stepped out of their offices, alerted by the shouting. Richard stopped a few feet away from me. He looked at me not as a successful businesswoman, but as a disobedient child who needed to be broken. "Turn those cards back on immediately," he commanded, his voice dripping with venom. "You embarrassed your brother and your sister-in-law today. You will call the bank, restore our access, and apologize to Harrison for your pathetic tantrum." I stared at him, my expression completely void of emotion. "I am not turning anything back on," I stated clearly. "Those cards were for medical emergencies, not designer baby accessories. You have your own money. Use it." Richard took a step closer, invading my personal space. His eyes were wide with a terrifying sense of entitlement. "I brought you into this world," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "Every dime you have belongs to this family. You are an ungrateful, selfish girl who owes everything to us. Your money is our money." Patricia stepped forward, attempting to play the disappointed matriarch. "Natalie, look at what you are doing to your father," she scolded loudly. "You are tearing this family apart over a few $1,000s. Stop this nonsense and do as you are told before you lose us completely. I did not cry. I did not flinch. 5 years ago, a scene like this would have broken me. I would have handed over my checkbook just to stop the yelling and secure their fleeting approval. But the woman standing in the lobby today was not a desperate daughter. She was a self-made commercial investor who had just severed the final cord of a toxic attachment. I looked past my screaming parents and caught the eye of the building security guard who had just arrived via the private elevator. I raised my hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod. Please remove these two individuals from my floor, I instructed the guard calmly. If they attempt to return, issue a formal trespass warning and contact law enforcement. Richard's jaw dropped. You cannot do this, he roared as the security guard stepped between us, placing a firm hand on my father's shoulder. I am your father. You owe me. I looked at him with absolute ice in my veins. I owe you nothing, I replied softly. Escort them out. I turned around, walked back into my office, and closed the heavy glass door. The soundproofing instantly muted their shouting into pathetic, distant mumbles. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the bustling city streets below. I watched as building security eventually escorted them out onto the pavement. Richard was still waving his arms aggressively while Patricia pulled her coat tightly around her shoulders, looking around in sheer embarrassment. They expected me to chase after them, begging for forgiveness. Instead, I simply turned my back on the window, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. The purge had officially begun, and I was entirely prepared for whatever desperate tactic they tried next. I did not have to wait long. By Tuesday morning, my public relations director stood in my doorway looking pale. She handed me an iPad. Nia had weaponized her 50,000 followers. I tapped the screen and watched the theater unfold. Nia sat in a dimly lit room wearing a faded gray sweater and zero makeup. Her eyes were red, forcing out dry sobs. My sister-in-law, a multimillionaire real estate investor, just cut off our family out of pure spite. Nia whimpered, clutching her belly. She is trying to evict her elderly parents and her pregnant sister-in-law just because my husband is building a successful company. She is miserable, so she is using her wealth to destroy our family. The video had over 500,000 views. My company pages were taking a massive hit. Hundreds of one-star reviews flooded my firm profiles. Heartless corporate monster. Evicts pregnant women. Do not do business with this agency. Nia had unleashed a digital mob expecting me to surrender under the crushing pressure of public shaming. She thought I would immediately call her, begging her to take the video down to protect my corporate image. She was entirely wrong. I called my lawyer Declan. He is a senior litigator who treats the courtroom like a slaughterhouse. He arrived within 20 minutes, tossing his briefcase onto my mahogany conference table. I saw the video, Declan said, his voice devoid of emotion. It is a textbook case of tortious interference and defamation. I have a cease and desist letter drafted. I can have a courier drop it at their doorstep by noon. If she does not delete the video and issue a formal retraction within 24 hours, I will drag her into civil court. I will liquidate whatever assets she owns and garnish her earnings until she is bankrupt. I looked at the heavy legal document resting on the table. It was a masterpiece of legal threats, but I slid the paper back across the table toward him. No, I said calmly. Do not send it. Declan frowned, crossing his arms. She is actively damaging your business reputation. Those fake reviews could cost you institutional clients. We need to shut this circus down immediately. Defamation is a misdemeanor, Declan, I explained. A civil suit gives them exactly what they want. It gives them a platform to play the victim even harder. They want me to engage legally so they can milk this family drama for social media engagement. I am not giving them a cease and desist. I am giving them enough rope to hang themselves. Let them keep talking. Let them dig a federal-level grave. We wait. Declan smiled. It was a predatory, calculating smile. You have a specific angle in mind, he noted. They are desperate, I said. Nia's card declining at the luxury store was just the beginning. Harrison has zero actual income. My parents relied entirely on the corporate cards I canceled. When arrogant people who are obsessed with their public image run out of money, they do not just cry on the internet. They break the law to maintain the illusion of wealth. We just need to know exactly how deep the financial rot goes before we strike. To map out that rot, I needed someone who specialized in finding buried secrets. Declan made a quick encrypted phone call. 2 hours later, a private investigator walked into my office. His name was Vance. He was a former forensic accountant for the federal government. He sat down quietly, pulling out a secured tablet. I need a complete surgical financial autopsy on two primary targets, I told Vance, sliding a thick file folder across the desk. Target 1 is my brother Harrison. He claims to be the founder of a technology startup dealing in cryptocurrency. I want to know who his investors are and what his actual operating revenue is. I suspect his entire company is nothing more than a digital shell game designed to scam novice investors. Vance nodded, his face impassive as he typed rapidly on his screen. And Target 2, I instructed my parents, Richard and Patricia. They live in a massive suburban property, but they have zero actual retirement income. I want a full sweep of their personal assets. Check public records, hidden property liens, credit histories, and recent tax filings. I have a strong suspicion their lifestyle is built on a highly leveraged house of cards. I want to know exactly who holds the mortgage on that house and what their true debt-to-income ratio is. Leave no stone unturned. Vance reviewed the details and looked up. Financial autopsies are invasive. If they have active alerts on their credit profiles, they might notice someone is poking around. Let them notice, I replied coldly. I want them to feel the pressure, but I need the hard data within 48 hours. Can you deliver? I will have the preliminary reports by tomorrow evening, Vance promised. He took the file, shook my hand, and left the office without another word. I turned to my screen. Nia was posting follow-up stories on Instagram, wiping fake tears and thanking her followers. She was basking in the unearned attention, oblivious that her digital performance was the least of her problems. She thought the battlefield was social media. She had no idea I was moving pieces on a completely different, dangerous board. By shutting off the money, I forced them into a tight corner. They would need cash quickly. Status-addicted people will do illegal things to avoid admitting they are broke. I did not need to fight them in a comment section. I just needed absolute proof of their financial fraud and wait for them to make a fatal mistake. The trap was set. All I had to do was to sit back and watch them walk right into it. Vance returned exactly 48 hours later. He did not offer a polite greeting. He walked straight to my desk and dropped two thick, heavily redacted folders onto the polished wood surface. The thud felt heavy with impending destruction. I instructed my receptionist to hold all calls, locked the office door, and gestured for Vance to take a seat. We started with the first folder, Harrison. I opened the file expecting to see a disorganized business structure or a failing app prototype. The reality was much more pathetic. Harrison was not a tech founder. He had never built a single line of viable software. His so-called empire was a tangled web of shell companies registered in Delaware, entirely set up to obscure his massive losses. Vance explained the mechanism of Harrison's failure with clinical precision. My brother had launched a worthless cryptocurrency token, promising astronomical returns to his small circle of naive investors. When the market inevitably shifted, he attempted to cover his losses by day trading on leverage. He fell victim to a classic rug pull scheme, except he was the mark. He had zero venture capital backing. His corporate revenue was absolute zero. His liabilities, however, were catastrophic. He owed vast sums of money to predatory online lenders and faced margin calls he simply could not meet. Nia was parading on social media, acting like a billionaire's wife, oblivious that her husband was drowning in digital debt. I processed this information quickly. It confirmed every suspicion I ever held about my brother's arrogant incompetence. But Vance leaned forward, his expression grave, and tapped the second folder. That is the boring part, he stated flatly. You need to look at your parents' financial autopsy. That is where the real bleeding is happening. I pulled the second folder toward me and flipped it open. I expected to find dwindling retirement accounts or high-interest credit card debt. What I found instead was absolute financial annihilation. Vance walked me through the stark numbers pointing to highlighted sections on the printed bank statements. Richard and Patricia had zero liquid assets. Their retirement portfolios had been entirely liquidated and drained 3 years ago. Then Vance directed my attention to the property records for their sprawling suburban mansion, the house they proudly flaunted at their country club dinners, the very same house they had left entirely to Harrison in their updated will. It was a hollow shell. Behind the manicured lawns and the fresh paint, there was zero equity left. My parents secretly took out a massive home equity line of credit. When they burned through those funds, they took out a second mortgage. The total debt currently leveraged against the house was exactly $400,000. Where did the $400,000 go? I asked calmly. Vance flipped to a page showing a complex web of wire transfers. Every dollar was funneled directly into Harrison's fraudulent crypto ventures. Richard and Patricia had literally mortgaged their future, their security, and the roof over their heads to fund their golden child's delusions of grandeur. They handed him $500,000 to play a digital casino game, and he lost every single cent. However, the financial autopsy revealed a much more pressing crisis. Vance tapped a red flag document near the back of the file. The bank is exactly 60 days away from initiating formal foreclosure proceedings, he explained. Your parents have missed the last 4 consecutive payments on the second mortgage. The grace period is over. The walls are not just closing in on them, they are actively collapsing. I sat completely frozen in my leather executive chair as the sheer scale of their deception washed over me. Suddenly, the scattered puzzle pieces snapped together with horrifying, crystal-clear precision. The updated will I had discovered on my father's laptop. The clause leaving the house and all assets to Harrison. The deliberate stinging insult of leaving me exactly $1 to prevent me from contesting it. It was never just a final slap in the face. It was a meticulously crafted financial trap. My parents knew they were drowning in debt. They knew the house was completely underwater, but they also knew I was the one anonymously paying their primary mortgage every month through the blind trust. Their master plan was incredibly sinister in its calculation. They intended to keep taking my monthly payments to keep the primary mortgage afloat and prevent immediate eviction. When they eventually passed away, Harrison would inherit the deed to the house. As the sole heir, he would get the property, but the massive crippling debt of the second mortgage would somehow need to be settled. They fully expected my ingrained sense of duty to kick in. They assumed I would step up, protect the family reputation, and pay off the $400,000 to save the house from the bank. They were going to use my money to clear Harrison's debt effectively, handing him a free and clear mansion paid for entirely by my sweat and blood. The audacity of their scheme left me breathless for a fraction of a second. They truly viewed me as a disposable asset. I was nothing more than a pack mule designed to carry the heavy weight of Harrison's failures. I looked at Vance. The investigator was watching me closely, probably expecting tears of meltdown or some display of family heartbreak. Instead, a deep, resonant calm settled over my entire body. It was the absolute peace of a woman who realizes she holds all the cards. Are these public records? I asked Vance, keeping my tone strictly professional. He confirmed the liens were recorded, but the foreclosure notices were currently internal to the bank's pre-litigation department. The snobby country club crowd had no idea. Nia definitely had no idea she married a man whose net worth was deep in the negative. I closed the folders and stacked them neatly on the corner of my desk. Thank you, Vance. Your invoice will be paid in full within the hour. He left the office understanding that a brutal storm was about to hit my family. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Declan. When he answered, I did not waste time with pleasantries. I need you to contact the Commercial Lending Division at First National Bank. I instructed my lawyer, my eyes fixed on the city skyline. We are going to make a major debt purchase. Declan was silent for a brief moment on the other end of the line. Buying residential debt is highly irregular for our portfolio, he said. We deal in commercial high-rises and industrial parks, not suburban mortgages. Why do you want a non-performing loan on a residential house? I explained my strategy with absolute clarity. The bank was 60 days away from initiating foreclosure on my parents' house. I wanted to step in before the public notice hit the county registry. I instructed Declan to set up a brand new, completely anonymous limited liability company in Delaware. We would use the Shell Corporation to approach the bank and purchase the promissory note and the secondary mortgage outright. You want to become your parents' debt collector, Declan stated, summarizing the move perfectly. That is a brutal power play even for you. I want to own the paper, I corrected him. They tried to trap me into paying off a $400,000 debt to secure Harrison's future. Instead, I am going to buy the debt, hold the lien, and pull the strings. Declan moved with terrifying efficiency. Within 24 hours, a new entity named Vanguard Holdings LLC was legally registered in Delaware, providing complete anonymity. The beauty of the Delaware LLC structure was its impenetrable corporate veil. My name appeared nowhere on the public incorporation documents. The managing member was listed as a registered agent service, completely shielding my identity from anyone who might try to dig into the company structure. Even if Richard decided to hire a desperate attorney to investigate who bought his debt, he would hit a solid brick wall of registered agents and holding trusts. I was completely invisible. I had effectively weaponized the very financial system Harrison claimed to understand, but fundamentally failed to grasp. Once the legal shield was firmly in place, Declan reached out to the asset management division at First National Bank. Banks generally despise non-performing loans. A second mortgage that is 4 months in arrears is a toxic asset sitting on their balance sheet. Usually, they sell these distressed debts in bulk portfolios to aggressive collection agencies for pennies on the dollar. But Declan did not offer them a bulk deal. He presented a targeted, highly lucrative proposition. Vanguard Holdings LLC offered to buy the specific secondary mortgage attached to my parents' address. To make the offer irresistible and completely bypass their standard bureaucratic red tape, we offered to buy the debt at a premium. We offered the bank the full outstanding principal balance of $400,000, plus all accrued late fees, penalties, and a 10% administrative premium for an immediate expedited transfer of the lien. For the bank executives, it was an absolute miracle. Instead of spending months dragging my parents through a messy, expensive public foreclosure process and dealing with hefty legal fees, they were handed a pile of clean cash. They jumped at the opportunity to offload the liability. The transaction moved at lightning speed. Because I was using liquid capital from my commercial investment accounts, there was no need for complex underwriting or credit approvals on my end. I simply authorized a massive wire transfer from my corporate treasury. 3 days after my initial phone call with Declan, I found myself sitting in the sleek, glass-enclosed conference room of my lawyer's office. The senior vice president of distressed assets from First National Bank sat across from me. He had no idea that the wealthy commercial investor purchasing this specific suburban debt was actually the biological daughter of the defaulting borrowers. To him, Vanguard Holdings LLC was just another aggressive real estate firm adding a distressed property to its portfolio. He pushed a thick stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany table. I signed the assignment of mortgage and the endorsement of the promissory note on behalf of the LLC. With each stroke of my pen, I was legally purchasing the financial leash that my parents had tried to wrap around my neck. The bank representative smiled, shook my hand, and thanked me for the seamless transaction. He walked out of the office carrying a certified wire transfer confirmation, leaving me alone with Declan and the physical files. I pulled the heavy manila folder toward me and opened it. Inside rested the original promissory note bearing Richard's and Patricia's signatures. The blue ink from years ago looked completely ordinary, but the immense power those signatures now represented was absolute. By executing this financial maneuver, the bank had formally transferred all their rights, title, and interest in the mortgage directly to my anonymous company. Declan sat across from me, watching my reaction closely. "You understand your exact position now," he stated professionally. "You are the legal lien holder. You hold the secondary mortgage. Because they are in default, you possess the immediate legal right to demand payment in full." If they fail to produce the $400,000, you have the unilateral authority to initiate foreclosure proceedings, seize the property, and legally evict them. I ran my fingers over the crisp paper of the legal assignment. The power shift was staggering. My parents were sitting in their suburban mansion right now, likely stressing over how to hide their missed payments from their wealthy country club friends. They were probably still banking on their delusional scheme, waiting for the day I would blindly step in to save the family honor. They had no idea that the faceless, ruthless corporate entity that now owned their massive debt was their own daughter. They had no idea that they were currently living under my roof entirely at my mercy. And then there was Harrison. My arrogant brother was still parading around as a visionary tech founder, completely oblivious that his grand inheritance was officially vaporized. Nia was busy planning her luxurious lifestyle influencer content, unaware that the very ground beneath her designer shoes was legally controlled by the sister-in-law she had just insulted at the dinner table. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought their blatant disrespect would go unpunished because family always forgives. I closed the folder and handed it back to Declan for safekeeping in his secure, firm vault. "Keep the paperwork ready," I instructed him quietly. "We are not initiating the foreclosure process today. We will wait for them to make their next move." I knew my parents would panic soon. Without the monthly influx of cash I had previously provided, their house of cards was completely unstable. They would try to manipulate me again. They would try to force my hand. But the dynamic had fundamentally changed forever. I was no longer the desperate daughter seeking validation. I was the bank, and the bank always collects its due. Exactly 1 week later, the silence broke. My phone buzzed with an incoming voicemail from Patricia. Her voice trembled with manufactured panic, cracking perfectly on cue. "Natalie, please come to the house immediately," she sobbed into the receiver. "Your father had a severe heart scare this morning. The stress of this family division is literally killing him. He is resting in the living room and he wants to apologize for everything. Please just come over." I listened to the message twice. A genuine medical emergency would warrant a hospital visit, not a cozy living room reconciliation. The sheer manipulation was staggering. They were using a fake medical crisis to drag me back onto their turf. I did not rush out in a panic. I took a shower dressed in my sharpest charcoal-tailored power suit and drove to the suburbs with absolute composure. I knew exactly what awaited me. When I pulled into the driveway, I immediately spotted Harrison's parked car near the garage. A sleek, unfamiliar sedan sat parked right behind him. I walked up the front steps and let myself in. The scene inside the living room was perfectly staged, but it lacked a single medical monitor or prescription bottle. Richard was not pale or struggling to breathe. He was sitting comfortably in his plush leather armchair, sipping a glass of iced tea. Patricia was hovering nearby, holding a tissue she clearly did not need. Harrison was pacing the floor, practically vibrating with nervous, greedy energy. Nia sat on the pristine white sofa, wearing a designer maternity blouse, holding her smartphone tightly in her hand. And then there was the stranger. Sitting opposite Richard was a man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit that reeked of discount cologne. He carried a battered leather briefcase and wore a smug, predatory grin. "I thought Dad was having a heart scare," I stated, remaining standing in the entryway. I crossed my arms and looked directly at Richard. "You look remarkably healthy for a man on the brink of cardiac arrest." Patricia dabbed her dry eyes with the tissue. "He had terrible palpitations this morning, Natalie. The stress of your abandonment is destroying his health. We had to intervene before the worst happened. Please come sit down." I stayed exactly where I was. "Who is the man in the cheap suit?" I asked, pointing a manicured finger at the stranger. The man bristled, his fake smile faltering for a split second. He stood up, puffing out his chest to appear authoritative. "My name is Trent, and I am the legal counsel representing your parents and your brother. We invited you here today to resolve a very serious legal and financial crisis before it reaches a courtroom." Trent reached into his battered briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. He slapped them down onto the glass coffee table and slid them aggressively toward my side of the room. The header, printed in bold black letters across the top page, read, debt assumption and liability transfer agreement. Your parents are facing extreme financial hardship. Trent began pacing around the coffee table like a terrible actor in a daytime television drama. They are currently leveraged with a $400,000 secondary mortgage. As their daughter, you possess a substantial corporate income. Under the filial responsibility laws of this state, adult children are legally obligated to provide financial support for their impoverished parents. If you refuse to assume this debt today, we are fully prepared to take you to court. You could face severe legal penalties, wage garnishment, and even charges of criminal neglect. I stared at Trent. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing directly in his face. Filial responsibility laws were archaic statutes that were almost never enforced in modern courts, and they certainly did not apply to a family trying to pass off a $500,000 crypto gambling debt disguised as a secondary mortgage. Trent was a complete fraud. I was likely just a sleazy friend. Harrison met at a networking event, hired to intimidate a woman they assumed was entirely ignorant of real estate law. They genuinely believed I would be terrified by big legal words and sign away my wealth just to avoid a fake lawsuit. I looked at the document on the table, then looked at Harrison. So this is the grand plan, I said, my voice dripping with absolute disdain. You blow $400,000 on fake digital coins, and your solution is to hire a strip mall lawyer to bully me into paying off your catastrophic gambling debt. You are a coward, Harrison. Harrison's face turned an ugly shade of purple. Shut your mouth, he shouted, stepping aggressively toward me. You are going to sign that paper. You owe us. You have millions sitting in your corporate accounts while my company is suffering. You are going to take over that mortgage right now. Before I could respond to his pathetic outburst, Nia stood up from the white sofa. She held her smartphone up, the camera lens pointed directly at my face. I could clearly see the red recording icon blinking on the screen, her lips curled into a vicious, triumphant smirk. Sign the paper, Natalie, Nia whispered, her tone laced with absolute venom. Sign it right now, or I swear I will post this video. I will tell my 50,000 followers exactly how you abuse the elderly. I will tell them you abandoned your sick, dying father to hoard your millions. I will tag every single commercial client on your corporate website. I will mobilize my entire network to review bomb your agency into the ground. Your business will burn before the sun comes up tomorrow. The sheer audacity of her threat hung heavily in the air. Richard and Patricia watched me eagerly, waiting for my spirit to break. They expected me to panic at the thought of a public relations disaster. They expected me to cave under the threat of public humiliation and legal extortion. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. Harrison crossed his arms, looking immensely satisfied with his wife's blackmail attempt. They wanted a reaction. They wanted fear. They wanted me to grab the pen and sign my life away to protect my reputation. I stood completely still, analyzing the four predators in the room. They had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to finish them permanently. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer. I did not pull out a pen to sign their ridiculous document. I pulled out my own smartphone. I held it up so the bright screen was visible to everyone in the living room. The voice memo application was open, and the red timer was ticking upward. It had been recording for 22 minutes. I had started it the moment I parked my car in their driveway. Nia lowered her phone, her triumphant smirk instantly faltering. Her perfectly manicured fingers loosened their grip on her device as confusion washed over her face. She looked at Harrison, then back to my screen, trying to process what was happening. I maintained direct eye contact with Nia as I pressed the stop button. A sharp, distinct beep echoed through the silent room, signaling that the audio file was saved and automatically backed up to my secure cloud storage. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for audio recording. I announced, my voice carrying the steady, measured cadence of a corporate executive closing a hostile negotiation. That means as long as one person involved in the conversation consents to the recording, which in this case is me, the entire audio file is completely legal and admissible in a court of law. So I want to personally thank you, Nia. You just put premeditated extortion and blackmail on the permanent record. The color completely drained from Nia's face. She stumbled backward, her knees hitting the edge of the pristine white sofa before she collapsed onto the cushions. Harrison lunged forward, his hands reaching out to grab my phone, but I took a swift, calculated step back. I slipped the device safely into my pocket. "You delete that right now," Harrison screamed, his voice cracking with sudden, uncontrollable panic. "You cannot use that. We are your family. We were just negotiating a financial settlement. You were attempting to coerce me into assuming a $500,000 debt under the threat of public defamation and reputational sabotage." I corrected him coldly. "That is not a negotiation, Harrison. That is a felony. And thanks to your wife, I have the entire conspiracy captured in ultra-high-definition audio." I turned my attention away from my hyperventilating brother and focused entirely on the stranger in the cheap suit. Trent had gone incredibly still. The predatory grin he wore just minutes ago had completely vanished, replaced by the distinct look of a man who suddenly realized he had stepped onto the wrong battlefield. I was slowly trying to inch his battered briefcase off the glass coffee table, hoping to slip away unnoticed. I did not let him. Before I walked through the front door today, I had my investigator run the license plate of the unfamiliar sedan parked in the driveway. I stated, locking my eyes onto his sweating face. "It took less than 2 minutes to pull your profile. Your name is Trent Garrison. You barely passed the bar exam on your fourth attempt, and you currently operate out of a shared co-working space above a discount mattress store." Trent swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly against his tight shirt collar. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely out of his depth. "Your State Bar Association number is 48291. I recited smoothly, watching his eyes widen in absolute horror. "You drafted a fraudulent liability transfer document. You sat in this room and actively participated in the attempted extortion of a corporate executive. You tried to weaponize fake filial responsibility statutes to intimidate me. My legal team will be filing a formal grievance with the State Ethics Board first thing tomorrow morning. You will be disbarred by Friday." Trent did not try to defend himself. He did not try to argue the law or protect his clients. He snatched his briefcase off the table, practically shoving Richard out of the way as he bolted toward the front door. He did not say a single word to Harrison or my parents as he fled the house, slamming the door behind him. Harrison watched his cheap legal muscle abandon ship. His chest heaved as he turned back to me, his fists clenched at his sides. "Natalie, please," he stammered, the aggression rapidly draining from his posture, replaced by sheer desperation. "You do not understand the pressure I am under. The crypto market crashed. The lenders are calling me every single day. I am going to lose everything. You have to help me." I looked at my parents. Richard was staring at the floor, his fake heart scare completely forgotten in the wake of this disaster. Patricia had her hands pressed against her mouth, finally realizing that their golden boy had dragged them into a federal-level catastrophe. They had risked everything to protect him, and they had lost. "You dug this grave yourselves," I said to my parents, my voice devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "You remortgaged your home to fund his gambling. You tried to use me as a human shield to absorb the financial impact. You sat in those chairs and watched his wife threaten to burn my business to the ground. And you did not say a single word to stop her." I walked past Harrison and opened the front door. The crisp outdoor air hit my face, washing away the toxic atmosphere of their living room. "Wait!" Harrison yelled, running toward the entryway. "Natalie, do not leave. If you walk out that door, the bank is going to take the house. We will have nowhere to go. Nia is pregnant. You cannot do this to us." I paused on the front step and looked back at my older brother. He was sweating, his face pale and twisted in absolute terror. The arrogant tech founder facade was completely shattered. He was just a scared, broke man facing the devastating consequences of his own actions. "I did not sign a single page of your ridiculous contract," I told him. "And I am never giving you another dime. Good luck with the bank, Harrison." I turned and walked down the driveway to my car. I could hear Harrison shouting my name, begging me to come back, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. I unlocked my car, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw Nia standing in the window watching me leave. She was no longer holding her phone. She was just staring at my departing vehicle, realizing that her luxurious lifestyle was officially over. I drove 2 blocks away and pulled over to the side of the road. I pulled out my phone and sent the audio file directly to my lawyer, Declan. I typed a brief direct message to accompany the recording. They tried to extort me using the debt. Trent Garrison was their legal counsel. File the ethics complaint against his bar license tomorrow morning. Hold the audio file for the criminal fraud report. Declan replied less than a minute later. Received. The lawyer is finished. What is our next move? I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the main road, heading back toward the city. The trap had failed, and now Harrison was entirely out of options. He needed cash immediately, and he knew he could not get it from me. Desperate people make careless, illegal mistakes when they are backed into a corner. I knew Harrison would not stop here. He would try to find another way to access my wealth. I just had to wait for the monitoring alerts to trigger. The wait lasted exactly 72 hours. Harrison was backed into a suffocating corner. The fake lawyer had fled, the extortion attempt had failed spectacularly, and his cryptocurrency creditors were undoubtedly breathing down his neck. Above all else, he had to face Nia. I could only imagine the furious demands she was making in the guest bedroom of my parents' house. Her fake influencer lifestyle required a constant, massive influx of cash to maintain the illusion of wealth. Without my corporate credit card, her luxury brand was entirely bankrupt. Harrison needed liquid capital, and he needed it immediately, or his marriage and his fake empire would completely disintegrate. Desperate men do not suddenly develop a work ethic. They look for shortcuts. Harrison decided to take a shortcut that crossed directly into federal territory. On a Tuesday night, while Richard and Patricia were asleep, Harrison crept down the wooden stairs into the musty, unfinished basement of my childhood home. He knew exactly what he was looking for. Tucked in the back corner of the basement sat a dented green metal filing cabinet where my father hoarded decades of family paperwork. Tax returns, medical records, old report cards, and financial documents were crammed into the sagging drawers. Harrison dug through the files until he found a dusty manila folder labeled with my name. Inside rested a stack of my old W-2 forms from my early college days, back when I still used their suburban house as my permanent mailing address. The documents contained my full legal name, my date of birth, and the golden ticket he desperately needed, my social security number. He took the folder back upstairs, locked himself in his childhood bedroom, and opened his laptop. He convinced himself that he was a technological genius. He likely assumed that because I was busy running a commercial real estate firm, I would not notice a few new accounts on my credit profile until the physical statements arrived in the mail a month later. He figured he would use the credit limits to pay off his aggressive crypto lenders, buy Nia whatever luxury items she demanded to keep her quiet, and somehow make the money back before the first billing cycle ended. It was the absolute delusion of a chronic failure. Harrison logged onto a secure browser and began executing the fraud. He typed in my social security number. He inputted my personal details but altered the contact email and routed the digital card access directly to his own smartphone. He applied for a Chase Sapphire Reserve card, approved for $40,000. Emboldened by the immediate success, he quickly opened a new tab. He applied for an American Express Platinum card, approved for $50,000. He requested instant digital card numbers, loading my stolen financial identity directly into his mobile wallet. He sat in the dark, staring at $90,000 of stolen purchasing power, completely convinced he had outsmarted me. He was profoundly mistaken. I was sitting in my penthouse home office reviewing a multi-million-dollar commercial lease agreement when my secure smartphone vibrated against the glass desk. A sharp, urgent chime broke the silence of the room. It was not a standard text message. It was a high-priority push notification from my executive-tier credit monitoring service. Because I handle massive commercial real estate transactions, my personal and corporate credit profiles are locked down with military-grade surveillance. Every single inquiry, every background check, and every data ping is tracked in real time. I picked up the phone and looked at the glowing screen. Hard inquiry detected, Chase Bank. I did not panic. I simply tapped the notification and opened the secure application. The dashboard loaded, displaying a secondary alert: new revolving credit account opened. Initial limit $40,000. Less than 3 minutes later, a third notification flashed across the screen. Hard inquiry detected: American Express, followed immediately by another new account approval for $50,000. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched the digital breadcrumbs populate on my screen. The monitoring software provided exact timestamps, the specific financial institutions involved, and the IP address region where the applications originated. The location ping traced perfectly back to the exact suburban zip code of my parents' house. The sheer staggering stupidity of his maneuver was almost beautiful to witness. Harrison had just escalated the situation from a toxic family dispute to a severe federal crime. Aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud. He was racking up felony charges from his childhood bedroom. A weaker person would have immediately called their parents. A desperate daughter might have texted her brother screaming at him to cancel the applications before she called the police. Any emotional reaction would have given him a chance to panic, to claim it was a misunderstanding, to close the accounts and beg for forgiveness. I was not going to give him a single second of warning. I took a sip of my sparkling water, pressed a button on my keyboard, and exported the complete security logs. I captured the timestamps, the approval codes, and the sequential evidence of his digital felony. I picked up my phone and dialed Declan. The phone rang twice before my lawyer answered. I instructed him to open my secure client portal and review the encrypted data stream I had just uploaded. I listened to the steady clicking of his keyboard on the other end of the line. Declan let out a low, sharp whistle. "Your brother just opened $90,000 in unauthorized credit using your social security number," he stated, his voice completely devoid of shock. "He crossed the line. This is no longer civil litigation, Natalie. This is a federal offense." "I know," I replied calmly. "I need you to prepare the identity theft affidavit for my signature. We are locking everything down immediately." "Do you want me to draft a warning letter to your parents?" Declan asked. "Absolutely not," I instructed. "They watched Nia threaten my business, and they watched Harrison try to extort me. They do not get warnings anymore. We are taking this straight to the top." I hung up with Declan and immediately opened my contact directory. I bypassed the local police department entirely. Local law enforcement often treats family identity theft as a civil domestic dispute, telling the victim to sort it out with their relatives. I was not leaving this to a local patrol officer. I dialed the direct hotline for the regional office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, navigating specifically to the Financial Crimes and Wire Fraud Division. I also opened a secondary tab on my computer to file an expedited sworn report with the Federal Trade Commission. A federal agent answered the line. I introduced myself, provided my corporate credentials, and formally reported an active ongoing case of aggravated identity theft. I provided my social security number, the exact timestamps of the fraudulent applications, the specific banks involved, and the IP address location. Because the fraudulent applications crossed state lines via banking servers and involved nearly $100,000, it instantly triggered federal jurisdiction. The agent took down every single detail, noting the severity of the financial exposure. I formally locked my credit profiles with all three major bureaus, ensuring no further accounts could be opened, while simultaneously leaving the fraudulent accounts active, just long enough for the federal investigators to trace the transactions. I hung up the phone and set it back down on my glass desk. The trap was now legally and permanently set. The federal machinery had been activated, and there was absolutely nothing my family could do to stop it. Harrison thought he had just secured a brilliant financial lifeline to buy his wife more designer clothes and keep his aggressive lenders at bay. In reality, he had just locked the doors of his own prison cell. I turned my attention back to my commercial lease agreement, my mind perfectly clear and entirely unbothered. The storm was rapidly approaching their suburban mansion, and I was not going to lift a single finger to protect them. The following morning, the sun rose over the city skyline, casting a brilliant light across my glass desk. While my parents and Harrison were likely sleeping off the stress of their impending financial doom, Declan and I were already executing the next phase of our counteroffensive. He arrived at my office precisely at 7 a.m. with a stack of formal affidavits. We were not merely making phone calls anymore. We were laying down the concrete foundation of a federal prosecution. I signed the Federal Trade Commission Identity Theft Report with a steady hand. Declan immediately transmitted the sworn documents, along with the complete digital log of IP addresses, time-stamped application approvals, and unauthorized access attempts, directly to the special agent we had spoken to the night before. Because the crime involved digital wire transfers, interstate banking servers, and a sum nearly reaching six figures, the Bureau categorized it as priority wire fraud. The federal machine operates slowly for petty theft, but when you hand them a perfectly packaged documented case of high-dollar financial crimes perpetrated across state lines, they move with terrifying speed. Declan did not stop at the federal reports. He leveraged his network within the banking compliance divisions. Armed with the official federal report numbers and my sworn affidavit, he contacted the fraud departments at both Chase and American Express. He informed them that the newly opened accounts were part of an active federal wire fraud investigation. The banks immediately flagged the accounts, but Declan went one step further. He pointed out that the IP address and physical location linked to the fraudulent applications perfectly matched the existing banking profiles of Harrison himself. Banks possess zero tolerance for internal fraud. The moment their compliance algorithms connected the stolen identity applications to Harrison's existing financial portfolio, his entire digital life became a massive liability. Declan knew exactly how the automated systems would react. Within hours, the banks executed a comprehensive system-wide freeze on every single account bearing Harrison's name. His checking accounts, his pathetic savings accounts, his linked cryptocurrency trading profiles, everything was instantly locked down, pending federal review. The trap I had set the night before had officially snapped its steel jaws shut. Miles away in the quiet suburbs, Harrison woke up feeling like an absolute conqueror. I could easily picture his arrogant morning routine. He likely rolled out of his childhood bed, checked his phone, and saw the digital approvals for $90,000 in credit sitting in his mobile wallet. In his delusional mind, he had won. He had secured the capital to silence his aggressive lenders, buy Nia whatever designer pacifier she demanded, and maintain his utterly fake reputation as a tech visionary. He threw on a designer jacket he could not afford and drove his least luxury sedan to an upscale artisanal coffee shop downtown, ready to celebrate his own manufactured genius. He strutted to the counter with the unearned confidence of a billionaire. He ordered an obscenely complicated espresso drink and a selection of expensive pastries, likely intending to bring them back to Nia as a peace offering. The barista rang up the total. Harrison pulled out his phone, intending to use his digital wallet. He tapped his screen against the payment terminal. A harsh, sharp beep echoed through the quiet coffee shop. The digital terminal flashed a bright red error message. Declined. Harrison scoffed, adjusting his jacket. He offered a condescending smile to the barista, blaming the terminal network. He pulled out his physical debit card, the one linked to his primary checking account, and handed it over. The barista swiped the card. Another loud beep rang out. The screen flashed a different message this time. It did not just say declined. It read, fraud alert, account frozen, retain card. The barista looked at the screen, then looked at Harrison with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. I am sorry, sir, the barista stated flatly, sliding the terminal away. Your bank declined the transaction and flagged the card. The system is instructing me to retain the physical card. I cannot process this payment. Harrison's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. He snatched his hand back as if he had been burned. Do you have any idea who I am? He hissed, his voice rising in panic and embarrassment. There is plenty of money in that account. Run it again. Run the digital wallet again. The barista shook his head and stepped back from the counter. I cannot do that, sir. You need to contact your financial institution. If you cannot provide another form of payment, I have to ask you to step aside. People in the line behind Harrison began to whisper. The stares burned into his back. The wealthy tech founder was suddenly struggling to buy a cup of coffee. He grabbed his phone and practically ran out of the coffee shop, his chest heaving with sudden inexplicable terror. He stood on the sidewalk in the freezing morning air and frantically dialed the customer service number on the back of his banking app. He navigated the automated menus with shaking fingers. When a representative finally answered, Harrison demanded immediate access to his funds, shouting about corporate emergencies and banking errors. The representative placed him on a brief hold. When she returned, her voice was stripped of any customer service warmth. "Sir, I am looking at your profile," the representative stated coldly. "Your entire financial portfolio has been subjected to a comprehensive asset freeze by our Fraud and Compliance Division. This action was taken in conjunction with an active federal investigation regarding identity theft and wire fraud. We cannot process any transfers, withdrawals, or payments. We cannot release any funds. You will need to await contact from federal authorities. The bank has terminated its relationship with you effective immediately." Harrison dropped his phone. It clattered against the concrete sidewalk. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving him looking like a ghost, standing in the middle of the bustling city. The realization crashed down on him with the force of a freight train. He was not a genius. He had not outsmarted me. He had walked blindly into an electrified fence. He tried to log into his cryptocurrency exchange app. Access denied. He tried to check the joint account he shared with Nia. Account locked. Every single digital pipeline he possessed was severed. He had zero cash in his wallet. He had no access to credit. He was standing on a street corner, completely and utterly broke, with the terrifying knowledge that the Federal Bureau of Investigation was currently building a case against him. He had wanted to play high-stakes financial games. He had wanted to treat my wealth as his personal emergency fund. Now he was experiencing the absolute terror of a true financial blackout. He had no money to pay his dangerous lenders. He had no money to appease his demanding wife. He had no money to buy gas for his leased car. The walls were rapidly closing in around the golden child, and there was absolutely no one left to bail him out. Harrison dragged himself back to our parents' suburban house with an empty stomach and absolutely zero cash. He had been forced to abandon his leased luxury sedan in a paid parking lot downtown because he could not even afford the exit ticket. He took the public transit bus back to the suburbs. I can only imagine the sheer humiliation he felt sitting on a crowded bus in his designer suit, avoiding eye contact with the other commuters, as he faced the reality of his ruined life. When he finally walked through the front door, Nia was waiting for him in the kitchen. She was tapping her manicured nails against the granite countertop, furious that he had returned empty-handed. She demanded to know where her expensive espresso and artisanal pastries were. Harrison could not look her in the eye. He mumbled a weak excuse about a banking glitch and tried to retreat to his childhood bedroom to hide. Nia was not a genius, but she possessed the razor-sharp survival instincts of a professional social climber. She immediately sensed the sheer panic radiating from him. She pulled out her smartphone and opened their joint banking application. She expected to see a temporary hold or a minor overdraft warning. Instead, the screen greeted her with a massive red banner warning that the account was locked by federal compliance mandates. She cornered him in the hallway. The screaming match that followed must have shaken the framed family photos on the walls. Harrison, trapped and completely exhausted, finally cracked under the pressure. He confessed everything to her. "I told her about stealing my social security number from the basement, the fraudulent credit card applications, and the sudden terrifying asset freeze from the banks." He admitted that the Federal Bureau of Investigation was likely building a case against him right at that very moment. Nia did not offer him a hug. She did not vow to stand by her husband through thick and thin. The moment she realized the money was entirely gone, and federal prison was a very real possibility, her loyalty evaporated instantly. She was a fake lifestyle influencer who had built her entire online persona around immense wealth and luxury. Being married to a broke convicted felon did not fit her carefully curated digital aesthetic. She needed an immediate exit strategy, and she needed a new source of funding fast. Less than an hour after Harrison confessed his federal crimes, my private cell phone rang. I was standing in my corporate boardroom, looking over a set of commercial blueprints. I glanced at the screen and saw Nia's name flashing on the caller ID. She must have locked herself in a bathroom or retreated to her car to make the call away from Harrison and my parents. I answered the call, but remained completely silent, letting the dead air force her to speak first. Natalie, thank God you picked up, Nia whispered into the receiver. Her voice was frantic, stripped of all the arrogant condescension she had used during our last encounter in my parents' living room. Please, you have to listen to me. I had absolutely no idea what Harrison was doing. I swear to you, I did not know he stole your identity. He is completely out of his mind. I kept my voice perfectly level. You are calling the woman whose business you tried to destroy on Instagram just a few days ago, I reminded her coldly. What exactly do you want, Nia? She took a ragged breath, pivoting seamlessly into her desperate pitch. I want to make a deal, she pleaded. I know you and your lawyers are building a case against him. I know the feds are involved. I will give you everything. I know where he keeps his encrypted hard drives. I know about the offshore accounts he tried to set up for his crypto scams. I will hand over his laptop, his passwords, and all of his physical files. I will stand up in federal court and testify as your star witness. I will serve him to you on a silver platter. I leaned against the mahogany conference table, genuinely amazed by the breathtaking speed of her betrayal. My family was a den of vipers, and the moment the heat was turned up, they immediately began devouring each other. And what exactly is the price for this unwavering loyalty? I asked, letting a hint of amusement bleed into my words. Nia hesitated for only a fraction of a second. I need a place to live, she stated, her greedy demands bubbling right back to the surface. I am pregnant. I cannot be tied to a criminal, and your parents are going to lose this house soon anyway. Buy me a 2-bedroom luxury condo downtown. Put it in my name. Give me a modest monthly stipend until the baby is born, and I will sign whatever legal affidavit your lawyer wants me to sign. I will ruin him for you. She actually thought she held a strong negotiating position. She thought her testimony was the missing puzzle piece I desperately needed. She failed to realize that Declan and I had already built an ironclad, mathematically perfect case using digital forensics. We did not need the testimony of an opportunistic, unemployed influencer to prove wire fraud. The banking servers had already done the work for us. I let out a slow, sharp laugh. The sound was entirely devoid of warmth. It echoed through my empty boardroom. You truly have an inflated sense of your own value, I told her. I do not need your testimony, Nia. I do not need his encrypted hard drives or his passwords. The federal government has his IP addresses, the time-stamped credit applications, and the exact wire logs. His conviction is already a mathematical certainty. You bring absolutely nothing of value to my table. Natalie, please, she begged, her voice cracking with genuine panic. You cannot just leave me here with him. I have nothing. You made your choices, I replied smoothly. You sat on my parents' white sofa and threatened to unleash your followers to burn my commercial real estate business to the ground. You demanded I co-sign a $100,000 car loan for you. You enabled his arrogance because you loved the money he was stealing from me. You do not get to jump ship just because the ship is finally sinking. I have followers, she threatened weakly, attempting to grasp at her last remaining weapon. I will go live right now. I will tell everyone you are leaving your pregnant sister-in-law homeless. I smiled, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. You cried beautifully on Instagram, Nia, I said, delivering the final blow with absolute precision. Save that performance for the jury. I ended the call immediately. I opened her contact profile and pressed block. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction wash over me. The toxic family structure that had tried to use me as a financial hostage was now collapsing inward. Harrison was trapped with a wife who was actively trying to sell him out to the highest bidder. My parents were trapped with a son who had just triggered a federal investigation under their roof. They were turning on each other, tearing their fake, picture-perfect image to shreds in a desperate bid for survival. I walked out of the boardroom and back to my office, ready to finalize the next stage of my plan. They had no money, no loyalty, and no way out. The ultimate reckoning was approaching fast, and I was going to ensure they felt the full weight of their consequences. Instead of confronting reality, my parents did what they always did when faced with a crisis. They doubled down on the grand illusion. I received the intelligence report from Vance later that week. The private investigator had kept a close watch on their financial movements, and what he discovered defied all logical comprehension. Richard and Patricia knew their secondary mortgage was in catastrophic default. They knew the original bank had sold their toxic debt to an unknown corporate entity. They knew Harrison was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment for identity theft and wire fraud. Yet the spring social season at their exclusive country club was in full swing. The pressure to host a spectacular high society baby shower for their first grandchild was mounting daily. Patricia simply could not bear the thought of the wealthy country club wives whispering behind her back. She needed to project absolute affluence to maintain her incredibly fragile social standing. So Richard executed an act of pure financial suicide. He sought out a predatory shadow lender. Since traditional banking institutions had blacklisted him and his credit score was entirely scorched earth, he found a hard money operation operating out of a strip mall that catered specifically to desperate people. Richard secured a $50,000 cash loan at an astronomical 50% interest rate. He used the suburban mansion as collateral, completely unaware that my anonymous corporate entity already held the primary lien on the property. He signed a predatory contract that guaranteed absolute ruin all to fund a single afternoon party. Nia, despite knowing her husband was completely broke and under active federal investigation, gladly took the unverified cash. She needed fresh content for her digital audience. As an African American lifestyle influencer, she felt immense pressure to aggressively prove to her followers that her luxury brand was still completely intact after the humiliating card decline at the Gucci boutique. She hired a team of elite event planners and transformed the suburban mansion into a grotesque display of unearned wealth. On the afternoon of the baby shower, I sat in my penthouse office monitoring the situation from afar. Through the live social media updates from Nia and her guests, I watched the sheer terrifying delusion unfold in real time. The event was sickeningly extravagant. Valet attendants in crisp white uniforms stood at the end of the driveway, parking a fleet of luxury vehicles for the 100 Country Club guests. A massive cascading floral archway made of imported white roses and rare orchids framed the front double doors. Inside the house was packed with local socialites, successful business owners, and minor local celebrities. Waiters in black ties circulated through the crowded living room, carrying heavy silver trays loaded with beluga caviar blinis and crystal glasses of vintage champagne. Nia was holding court in the exact center of the room. She wore a custom silk maternity gown, constantly adjusting her hair for the professional photography crew she had hired to document every single second of the event. She was performing her role flawlessly. She laughed loudly for the cameras and showed off a towering 6-tier custom diaper cake decorated with edible gold leaf. She was entirely focused on securing lucrative brand sponsorships, actively ignoring the fact that her husband was facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Harrison was equally detached from reality. He strutted through the crowd wearing a brand new bespoke designer suit that likely cost more than his entire liquid net worth. He held a crystal tumbler of top-shelf bourbon, loudly boasting to a group of older men about his tech startup. He actively pitched them on his cryptocurrency ventures, waving his hands expansively, pretending he was a visionary genius, on the verge of a massive market breakthrough. He had completely blocked out the memory of his frozen bank accounts and his failed extortion attempt. The golden child was back in his element, feeding off the unearned admiration of his parents' wealthy friends. Patricia was in her absolute glory. She glided between groups of wealthy wives, her chin held high, wearing a heavy diamond necklace she had undoubtedly purchased with the shadow loan money. She made sure to loudly mention how successful Harrison was becoming, how his tech company was revolutionizing the digital space, and how blessed they were to have such a beautiful growing family. Whenever someone politely asked about my absence, Patricia executed her practiced lie flawlessly. She sighed softly, placing a manicured hand on her chest, and explained that I was simply too tied up with international business meetings to attend. She painted herself as the proud, understanding matriarch of two wildly successful children. Richard stood by the outdoor infinity pool, smoking a premium cigar with the country club president. He puffed his chest out, acting like the undisputed king of his suburban castle. He surveyed the catering tents, the expensive string quartet playing softly in the garden, and the crowd of elites drinking his champagne. He looked at the house as if he actually owned it. He looked at his son as if Harrison was a legitimate success. He genuinely believed that the $50,000 shadow loan had successfully bought them another year of social invincibility. It was a masterclass in collective delusion. The four of them were standing directly on a trapdoor, happily throwing a lavish party, while the hinges were actively splintering beneath their feet. They had invited the most judgmental, status-obsessed people in their entire city to witness their manufactured triumph. They wanted an audience to validate their fake wealth and stroke their massive egos. They were about to get exactly what they asked for. I closed my laptop and stood up from my desk. The time for waiting was officially over. I walked over to my office closet and pulled out my sharpest, most intimidating tailored power suit. I checked my reflection in the mirror, ensuring my expression was completely devoid of mercy. I grabbed my designer handbag off the chair. Inside the bag rested a thick, certified stack of legal documents detailing my absolute ownership of their massive debt, alongside a signed court-ordered eviction notice provided by Declan. The stage was perfectly set, the audience was gathered, the champagne was poured. I walked out of my office and headed for the private elevator, fully prepared to crash the party and bring their grand illusion crashing down to the floor. The drive to the suburbs took exactly 45 minutes. I bypassed the line of luxury vehicles waiting for the valet service and parked my car directly on the pristine grass of the front lawn. The valet attendants shouted protests, but I ignored them entirely. I walked up the sweeping concrete driveway, my designer heels clicking sharply against the pavement. The massive front doors of the mansion were propped wide open to let the crisp spring air circulate through the crowded foyer. I did not knock. I did not wait to be announced. I simply stepped over the threshold and walked straight into the heart of their manufactured paradise. The entryway was suffocatingly bright. Pastel balloons cascaded down the grand staircase, and towers of expensive gifts overwhelmed the side tables. The sheer volume of wealth on display was nauseating, especially knowing it was entirely funded by predatory loans and criminal fraud. I stood in the center of the foyer wearing a pitch-black tailored power suit that contrasted violently with the soft pinks and baby blues surrounding me. For a brief moment, the party continued around me. The string quartet played a lively classical piece in the corner of the living room. Waiters passed by with silver trays of champagne. Then a woman standing near the gift table gasped. The sound triggered a chain reaction. Heads began to turn one by one. The lively chatter slowly dissolved into a thick, uncomfortable silence. The string quartet, sensing the sudden shift in the room's energy, faltered and stopped playing completely. The quiet parted the crowd like the Red Sea. At the far end of the living room, Patricia turned around. She had a crystal glass of champagne in one hand and was laughing at something the country club president had just said. The laughter died instantly on her lips when she saw me standing in the foyer. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking completely bloodless for a fraction of a second. But fear quickly mutated into raw, unfiltered fury. Her face flushed a deep, angry red that clashed horribly with her designer dress. She practically shoved past her wealthy friends, marching across the hardwood floor with an aggressive, terrifying intensity. "Security!" Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and shattering any remaining illusion of high society elegance. "Get her out of here right now!" She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her chest heaving with rage. "How dare you show your face at this event? You were cut out of the will, you ungrateful failure. You do not belong on this property." Harrison, hearing the commotion from the patio, pushed his way through the crowd. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me. He looked wildly around the room, panicking as he realized his wealthy investors and country club friends were witnessing this absolute disaster. Nia stepped up right behind Patricia, clutching her pregnant belly, protectively glaring at me with sheer hatred. She clearly thought I was there to beg for forgiveness or make a pathetic scene to ruin her special day. I looked past my screaming mother and observed the 100 guests gathered in the living room. They were absolutely captivated by the drama. These were the elite socialites of the suburbs, people who thrived on gossip and scandal. They stared at me with wide eyes, whispering behind their hands. They were waiting for the inevitable breakdown. They expected me to start crying. They expected me to scream back, to throw a tantrum about being disinherited, or to turn around and run out the front door in total humiliation. They thought they were watching a disgraced daughter getting rightfully banished by her wealthy, powerful family. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or shrink under the heavy weight of 100 judgmental stares. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting comfortably at my sides, projecting the absolute authority of a commercial real estate investor who held the entire room in the palm of her hand. My lack of emotional response only enraged Patricia further. She took another step toward me, closing the distance until she was mere inches from my face. "I told you to leave," Patricia hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper so the country club president would not hear the specific insults. "You have caused enough damage to this family. Harrison is building a massive legacy, and Nia is bringing a new life into this world. You are nothing but a jealous, empty woman trying to steal their joy because you have nothing of your own. Security is going to drag you out of here by your hair if you do not turn around and walk out that door right now." Harrison stepped up beside her, trying to puff out his chest and project dominance in front of his wealthy peers. "You heard her, Natalie," he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady, but failing to hide the slight tremor of panic. "You are trespassing. You have no legal right to be inside this house. We severed all ties with you. Go back to the city and leave us alone before I call the police myself." Nia sneered, shifting her weight to emphasize her maternity gown. She crossed her arms and looked me up and down with absolute disgust. "Did you really think crashing my baby shower would make us pity you?" She taunted loudly enough for the front row of guests to hear. "You are pathetic. You are not part of this family, and you are certainly not part of this inheritance." The entire room held its collective breath. The tension was so thick it felt like physical pressure against my skin. The country club elites leaned forward, waiting for my reaction. They expected a devastating retreat. They had no idea they were about to witness a financial execution. I looked at Harrison, who was sweating through his bespoke suit. I looked at Nia, who was clinging to a fabricated lifestyle. And finally, I looked directly into my mother's furious eyes. I smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile that made Patricia involuntarily take a half step backward. I reached into my designer handbag, my fingers closing around the thick stack of legal documents resting inside. The stage was perfectly primed. They had publicly declared their dominance, proudly standing on a foundation that I legally owned. It was time to pull the lever and drop the floor entirely. I pulled my hand out of my designer bag. My fingers gripped a thick, heavy stack of crisp legal documents bound by a stark black binder clip. I did not hand the papers to Patricia. I did not offer them to Harrison. Instead, I walked right past them. I moved with deliberate, unhurried steps toward the extravagant gift table dominating the center of the foyer. The crowd of elite country club guests parted instinctively, their eyes tracking my every movement. I stopped right in front of the towering six-tier custom diaper cake decorated with edible gold leaf. With a swift, forceful motion, I slammed the stack of legal documents directly onto the pristine white tablecloth. The heavy thud echoed sharply through the dead silent room, rattling the crystal champagne flutes on a nearby serving tray. Patricia spun around, her mouth dropping open in sheer outrage. "What is this garbage?" she shrieked, marching toward the table, her designer heels clicking frantically against the hardwood. "Are you trying to serve us with some pathetic lawsuit? You have absolutely no grounds to sue us for cutting you out of the inheritance. We owe you nothing." I turned to face her, my expression locked into a mask of absolute chilling calm. "You are right, Mom. I stated, my voice projecting clearly across the massive room, ensuring every single country club guest heard every syllable. I am not in the will because I do not need to inherit this house. I bought the bank debt. I own it. The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Patricia froze mid-step. Her hand, which had been reaching aggressively for the documents, hovered in the air, trembling violently. Harrison let out a loud, nervous bark of laughter, glancing around at his wealthy investors to gauge their reaction. "She is lying," Harrison announced, his voice cracking slightly. "She is just trying to create a scene because she is a jealous spinster. Do not listen to a single word she says. It is a desperate bluff." I kept my eyes locked on Patricia, ignoring Harrison completely. "Go ahead," I challenged her softly, pointing at the stack. "Read the top page. It is a formal assignment of mortgage from First National Bank, officially registered to Vanguard Holdings, LLC, a company I wholly own. When you and Dad secretly took out a $400,000 second mortgage to fund Harrison's catastrophic cryptocurrency gambling, you used this estate as collateral. And when you stopped making payments 4 months ago, the bank prepared to foreclose." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of elite socialites. Whispers erupted instantly from every corner of the lavish living room. Second mortgage, cryptocurrency gambling, foreclosure. The perfectly curated facade of the wealthy, invincible family was disintegrating right before their eyes. Patricia's face turned an ashen, sickly gray. She looked at Richard, who was standing frozen by the entryway, his premium cigar practically slipping from his fingers. "Richard," she gasped, looking for him to passionately deny the accusations. "Tell them she is lying. Tell them we own this house free and clear." Richard could not speak. The realization that their ultimate financial secret was being broadcast to the country club president and every socialite in the suburbs had completely paralyzed him. He looked like a man who had just been handed a death sentence. I did not stop there. "You thought you were so incredibly clever," I continued, my voice sharp and relentless as I addressed both my parents. "You thought you could trap me into paying off your massive debt after you died just so your golden boy could inherit a free and clear mansion. But you forgot one crucial detail. I am a commercial real estate investor. I buy distressed assets for a living. I approached your bank. I paid off your toxic secondary mortgage in full, including all the late fees and penalties you racked up while ignoring their calls. I am the legal lion holder of this property. You do not own this estate. I do." Nia pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her face contorted with panic and unhinged fury. "Harrison, do something!" she shrieked, grabbing his arm and shaking it violently. "Tell her she cannot take our house. Tell her we are buying that $2 million mansion today. You promised me we were closing today." Harrison tried to speak, but he was actively hyperventilating. His eyes darted toward the front door, searching for an escape route that did not exist. "There is no $2 million mansion, Nia," I informed her, turning my cold gaze to my sister-in-law. "Your husband is entirely broke. His bank accounts are currently frozen by federal compliance officers. He has zero revenue, zero venture capital, and a mountain of predatory debt. The only reason this baby shower is even happening is because Richard took out a $50,000 shadow loan at a 50% interest rate from a strip mall lender just to buy that caviar you are feeding your friends." The guests began physically backing away from the family, treating them like a highly contagious disease. The country club president actually set his champagne glass down on a side table and took a distinct step toward the exit. The absolute humiliation I had promised them was playing out in spectacular fashion. "This is a trick!" Patricia screamed, finally finding her voice. Her perfectly highlighted hair was disheveled, her eyes wide with total desperation as her social standing burned to the ground. "You cannot just steal our home. We have rights. We require proper legal notice. You cannot just barge in here and claim you own the place." I smiled. It was the moment I had been waiting for since the night I discovered that insulting will on the laptop. "You are absolutely correct, Mom," I agreed smoothly. "You do require proper legal notice." I raised my hand and signaled sharply toward the open front doors. The heavy, measured sound of boots hitting the concrete echoed from the porch. The static crackle of a police radio pierced the silent room. Two tall, broad-shouldered sheriff's deputies stepped into the brightly lit foyer. Their crisp, dark uniforms and gleaming badges instantly drained whatever fight was left in the room. The wealthy guests scrambled out of the way, pressing themselves against the walls to clear a wide path for law enforcement. The lead deputy, a stern-looking man with a clipped haircut, stepped forward. He held a bright yellow, court-ordered document in his right hand. He looked past the terrified guests, past Nia and Harrison, and locked his eyes directly on Richard and Patricia. "Richard and Patricia," the deputy announced, his authoritative voice cutting through the remaining whispers and confirming their absolute ruin. "We are here to serve a formal court-ordered eviction notice. You are unlawfully occupying a foreclosed property owned by Vanguard Holdings, LLC. You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises immediately." Patricia snatched the bright yellow document from the lead deputy with trembling manicured hands. Her eyes darted wildly across the bold black text. The words "eviction notice" and "order to vacate" stared back at her, stamped with the official seal of the county court. The heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone suddenly looked like a cheap costume prop. She shook her head violently, her perfectly styled hair falling out of place. "This is a mistake," Patricia stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "We own this house. My husband is a respected businessman. You cannot do this to us in front of our guests." The lead deputy did not flinch. His expression remained carved from stone. "The property transferred ownership legally," he stated, his voice booming across the silent foyer. "You ignored the certified mail notices. You ignored the final warnings. The grace period expired at midnight. You are currently trespassing." A collective gasp swept through the crowd of 100 elite socialites. The country club president quietly set his crystal champagne flute down on a silver tray and took a deliberate step toward the front door. The wealthy wives, the very women Patricia had spent years trying to impress, were now pulling out their smartphones. They were not recording the beautiful floral arrangements or the custom diaper cake. They were recording Patricia's absolute, undeniable public ruin. But the financial execution was only half of the nightmare. As Patricia crumpled the eviction notice in her fists, letting out a breathless sob, the second deputy bypassed her entirely. He was taller, broader, and his hand rested casually on his utility belt. He marched with heavy, purposeful strides directly across the hardwood floor, cutting straight through the crowd of terrified guests. He was heading straight for the Golden Child. Harrison saw the deputy approaching and immediately panicked. The arrogant tech founder facade evaporated instantly. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into the massive gift table. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, plastering on a fake, terrified smile. "Officer, there is a massive misunderstanding here," Harrison stammered, sweating profusely through his bespoke designer suit. "I am a tech entrepreneur. I am building a legacy. My sister is just causing a domestic disturbance because she is jealous of my success. Let me call my lawyer. I can clear this up in 2 minutes." The second deputy did not stop. He did not ask for clarification. He closed the remaining distance in 3 rapid strides, grabbed Harrison by his right shoulder, and forcefully spun him around. "Harrison, you are under arrest for identity theft and federal wire fraud," the deputy announced. His voice was impossibly loud, bouncing off the high ceilings and echoing into every corner of the lavish mansion. The words struck the crowd like a physical blast. Identity theft, federal wire fraud. The elite guests stared in absolute, unadulterated horror. They were watching the so-called visionary genius of the family being publicly dismantled by law enforcement. "Wait!" Harrison screamed, struggling against the deputy's grip. "No, you cannot do this. I have investors. I have a pregnant wife. You are ruining my life." The deputy ignored his pathetic flailing. He smoothly pulled Harrison's arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking into place echoed through the quiet room. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The definitive, undeniable sound of the Golden Child, finally facing the brutal consequences of his own arrogance. "You have the right to remain silent," the deputy recited flawlessly, snapping the second cuff onto Harrison's left wrist. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The reality of the cold steel biting into his wrists completely broke Harrison. The 36-year-old man who had spent his entire life being coddled, protected, and bailed out by his enabling parents completely lost his mind. He thrashed against the deputy, his designer jacket ripping at the seam. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes wide with sheer animalistic terror. He did not look at his pregnant wife. He did not look at his wealthy friends. "Mom!" Harrison screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracked, sounding like a terrified, helpless child. "Mom, do something. Tell them to stop. Tell them I did not do it. Mom, please help me." Patricia spun around at the sound of her precious son screaming. The eviction notice fluttered to the floor, completely forgotten. She let out a guttural, horrifying shriek, watching the deputy march her handcuffed son toward the front door. "My baby!" Patricia wailed, lunging forward, her arms outstretched as if she could physically fight off the sheriff's deputy. "Leave him alone. He is a good boy. He is a genius. You are making a mistake." The lead deputy immediately stepped in her path, holding up a stern warning hand that stopped her dead in her tracks. "Step back, ma'am," he ordered sharply. "Do not interfere with an active federal arrest." Across the room, Richard had been standing frozen near the patio doors. The dual shock of losing his mansion and watching his only son being hauled away in handcuffs for federal crimes was too much for his manufactured reality to bear. His face turned a dangerous mottled purple. He gasped for air, his hands flying up to clutch his chest violently. He staggered sideways, knocking over a tray of expensive appetizers. "My heart." Richard wheezed, his knees buckling as he collapsed against a marble decorative pillar. "I cannot breathe. Call an ambulance." A week ago, I would have rushed to his side. A week ago, I would have panicked, pulled out my credit card, and promised to fix everything. Today, I simply stood in the center of the foyer and watched the chaos unfold with absolute chilling detachment. I knew Richard was not having a real heart attack. It was entirely fake. This was his ultimate defense mechanism, deflecting pure shame. The country club president did not rush to my father's aid. He did not call for an ambulance or kneel beside Richard to offer comfort. Instead, the esteemed leader of my parents' elite social circle stepped right over my father's twitching legs and headed straight for the front double doors. That single callous movement broke the spell holding the room together. The mass exodus began instantly. 100 of the wealthiest, most judgmental socialites in the suburbs realized simultaneously that they were standing inside a foreclosed property during an active federal raid. The panic was immediate and absolute. These were people who guarded their reputations with vicious intensity. Being associated with a disgraced evicted family facing felony wire fraud charges was social suicide. They scrambled for the exits like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The elegant baby shower dissolved into a chaotic stampede. Women in expensive pastel dresses shoved past each other in the foyer, abandoning their half-empty champagne glasses on every available surface. Crystal flutes shattered against the hardwood floor, the expensive imported liquor mixing with the trampled petals of the floral archway. Husbands grabbed their wives by the arm, dragging them away from the scene of the crime. Nobody said goodbye to Patricia. Nobody offered sympathy to Richard, who was still clutching his chest on the floor and peeking through one half-open eye to gauge the crowd's reaction. What they did do, however, was document the disaster. Smartphones were raised high in the air. The bright flashes of camera lenses illuminated the foyer as the fleeing guests snapped photos of Harrison struggling in federal handcuffs. They recorded videos of Patricia wailing on her knees. Through the open front doors, I could hear the absolute chaos erupting on the front lawn. The valet attendants were completely overwhelmed by 100 panicked guests demanding their luxury vehicles all at once. Horns blared, tires screeched on the pavement, and insults were hurled as the elite attendees fought to escape the premises. By tonight, these images and stories would be circulating through every high society group chat and country club mailing list in the state. My parents had spent 4 decades meticulously crafting an image of untouchable financial superiority. I watched their entire social standing vaporize into absolute nothingness in under 3 minutes. As the last wave of panicked guests fled through the front doors, the sheer emptiness of the mansion became deafening. The only sounds left were Patricia's dramatic sobbing, the heavy breathing of the sheriff's deputies, and the crackle of their radios. And then there was Nia. My sister-in-law had been standing frozen near the gift table during the entire stampede. The towering six-tier custom diaper cake had been knocked over during the mass exit, crushing the imported white roses beneath it. Nia stared at the ruined cake, then slowly raised her eyes to look at her husband. The flawless, smug influencer facade she had worn for years was completely shattered. The terrible, crushing weight of reality was finally sinking into her carefully curated brain. She looked at the silver handcuffs locked tightly around Harrison's wrists. She looked at the bright yellow eviction notice lying crumpled on the floor. And finally, she looked directly at me. She processed the cold, hard truth of my black tailored power suit and the absolute authority I projected. There was no $2 million mega mansion waiting for her in the suburbs. There was no limitless crypto fortune. There was no golden child tech founder. There was only a massive mountain of predatory debt and a husband heading straight to a federal penitentiary. The transition from devoted pregnant wife to furious self-preserving opportunist happened in the blink of an eye. Nia did not rush to Harrison's side. She did not offer him words of comfort or promise to stand by him through the impending legal battle. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You lied to me!" Nia shrieked, her voice echoing violently through the empty living room. She stomped across the hardwood floor, her expensive maternity heels clicking aggressively. She stopped inches from Harrison, completely ignoring the towering deputy holding him. "You told me you were a millionaire. You told me we were closing on an estate today. You told me your company was securing massive venture capital. You promised me a life of luxury and endless resources." Harrison flinched, trying to shrink away from her fury while his hands remained bound behind his back. "Nia, please," he begged, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "It is a temporary cash flow problem. The feds are making a mistake. Just call Trent. Call the lawyer. We can fix this. I just need you to stand by me. We are a family." "Stand by you," she screamed, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch that drowned out Patricia's continued weeping. "Are you completely insane? You are a broke, fraudulent criminal. My followers are going to find out about this. My brand sponsorships will drop me the second your mugshot hits the Federal Registry. You have absolutely nothing. You dragged me into this fake lifestyle. You spent money that was not yours, and now you expect me to go down with your sinking ship." "Nia, you are my wife," Harrison pleaded, tears finally spilling down his pale cheeks, destroying his carefully groomed appearance. "You are carrying my child. Do not abandon me now." "I am carrying my ticket out of this disaster," she snapped back viciously. "Do not ever contact me again. I am calling a divorce attorney the second I get in my car." Without another word, Nia spun around on her heel. She marched over to the entryway table and snatched her $3,000 Gucci handbag, the very same bag she had tried to buy with my deactivated corporate card just days earlier. She did not look at Patricia, who was still weeping on the floor. She did not look at Richard, who had miraculously recovered from his fake heart attack, to watch his daughter-in-law desert the family. Nia simply marched out the front double doors, leaving her handcuffed husband crying in the middle of the ruined baby shower. She abandoned him on the exact spot where he had proudly boasted about his fake empire just 20 minutes prior. Harrison let out a gut-wrenching wail as Nia disappeared down the driveway. He pulled violently against the deputy's grip, trying to chase after her, but the officer easily overpowered him, slamming him firmly against the wall to secure his hold. Harrison collapsed inward, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of his absolute isolation finally took hold. His fake friends were gone. His opportunistic wife was gone. His stolen wealth was gone. I stood in the center of the foyer, completely untouched by the wreckage surrounding me. The toxic family unit that had tried to use me as a financial hostage had successfully consumed itself. The lead deputy signaled to his partner. Together they marched Harrison through the grand entryway, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The heavy wooden doors closed behind them, with a definitive thud cutting off the noise from the driveway. A moment later, the distinct sound of a police cruiser siren wailed to life, fading rapidly into the distance, as they transported the golden child to federal holding. The profound silence that descended upon the mansion was heavier than the chaos had been. The string quartet had long since packed their instruments and fled. The catered food sat abandoned on silver platters, rapidly spoiling in the afternoon sun that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Deflated pastel balloons drifted aimlessly across the hardwood floors, brushing against discarded champagne flutes and crushed white roses. I stood motionless in the center of the devastation, watching the absolute reality of the situation finally penetrate my parents' delusions. Richard was still slumped against the marble decorative pillar. His fake heart attack had miraculously cured itself the moment Harrison was dragged away. He slowly pushed himself up from the floor, leaning heavily against the wall. His premium cigar lay crushed beneath his Italian leather loafers. He looked around the ruined living room, his eyes darting frantically, searching for a loophole, a bailout, or a scapegoat. Finding none, his gaze slowly locked onto me. Patricia remained on her knees in the foyer. Her designer gown was soaked in spilled champagne and smeared with icing from the toppled diaper cake. The heavy diamond necklace sparkled mockingly against her chest. She stared at the yellow eviction notice resting a few feet away, treating the piece of paper as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. The lead deputy, who had remained inside to execute the civil order, cleared his throat. He tapped his clipboard with a heavy pen. "The property needs to be vacated," he stated, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that shattered the silence. "The legal transfer is complete. You are currently unlawfully occupying the premises." That single sentence broke whatever remaining pride Patricia held. The realization that they were entirely destitute, facing imminent homelessness, and entirely at the mercy of the daughter they had spent a lifetime degrading, finally broke her. She did not stand up with dignity. She crawled across the hardwood floor, the silk of her ruined dress dragging through the spilled champagne. She reached my feet and threw her arms around my knees, burying her face against the fabric of my tailored power suit. "Natalie, please," Patricia wailed. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its former country club arrogance. It was the raw, desperate screech of a cornered animal. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot throw us out into the street. We have absolutely nothing left. Harrison took everything. We are ruined. Please, you have to save us." Richard stumbled forward, practically falling to his knees beside his weeping wife. He clasped his hands together in a gesture of absolute submission. The mighty patriarch who just days ago had demanded I surrender my wealth to his control was now groveling on the floor of my foyer. "Natalie, listen to your mother." Richard pleaded, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "We made terrible mistakes. We were blind. Harrison manipulated us. He lied to us about his company. He told us the crypto investments were guaranteed. We were just trying to protect the family legacy. We never wanted to hurt you." I looked down at the two people who had brought me into this world. They were pulling out every single weapon in the manipulative arsenal they had honed over decades. They blamed Harrison entirely, conveniently forgetting that they had gleefully participated in the extortion attempt. They played the victims of a scam, ignoring the fact that they had mortgaged their home to fund it. "We are your blood," Patricia sobbed, looking up at me with mascara running down her face in thick, dark streaks. "We are your family. You cannot turn your back on your own flesh and blood. I am your mother. I carried you. I raised you. You are a good, successful woman, and you have a kind heart. I know you do. Please, Natalie, show us some mercy. We will do anything. We will sign whatever you want. We will live in the basement. Just do not cast us out." I stared down at them with absolute chilling detachment. 5 years ago, seeing my parents crying on the floor would have shattered me. I would have instantly written a check. I would have assumed their debt. I would have sacrificed my own financial security just to earn a single word of genuine praise from them. But I had spent the last 5 years building an impenetrable armor. Their tears did not move me. Their begging did not register as genuine remorse. It registered as a calculated transaction. They were only sorry because they had been caught outsmarted and stripped of their power. I gently but firmly stepped back, forcing Patricia to release her grip on my legs. I smoothed the crease of my trousers, and looked down at them with zero pity. You did not raise a daughter, I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the massive entryway. You raised a contingency plan. You raised a walking ATM machine that you intended to smash open the moment your golden child needed cash. But we are family, Richard choked out, grasping desperately at the final thread of his argument. Family does not rewrite a will to leave their daughter exactly $1 as an intentional insult, I countered smoothly. Family does not secretly leverage their home to hand $500,000 to a crypto gambling addict, and family certainly does not try to saddle their daughter with a catastrophic debt to fund a criminal. Patricia let out a fresh wave of hysterical sobs, burying her face in her hands. Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. The absolute truth of my words offered them no room for argument. The gaslighting was over. The manipulation was dead. You sat in this exact house and watched Nia threaten to burn my business to the ground. I reminded them, my tone merciless and final. You hired a fraudulent lawyer to extort me. You actively participated in a conspiracy to ruin my life so you could maintain your fake country club facade. You chose your side. You chose Harrison. Now you get to live with the exact consequences of that choice. I turned my attention to the lead deputy, who was watching the exchange with professional detachment. Deputy, I said clearly, gesturing toward my weeping parents on the floor. Execute the order. The deputy nodded sharply. He stepped forward, his heavy boots commanding immediate authority. He looked down at Richard and Patricia. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your essential belongings, the deputy instructed, his voice leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. If you are not entirely off this property in 60 minutes, my partner and I will physically remove you for trespassing. Patricia shrieked, clutching her chest, while Richard scrambled to his feet, pulling his wife up with him. They looked at me one last time, searching for a single ounce of hesitation or mercy in my eyes. They found nothing but absolute ice. 60 minutes, I repeated softly. The clock starts now. Fast forward 8 months, and the grand illusions of my family were entirely replaced by the cold, sterile reality of a federal courtroom. The mahogany walls of the United States District Court offered no comfort to people who built their lives on manufactured prestige. Harrison sat at the defense table. He looked remarkably small, stripped of his bespoke designer suits and his arrogant tech founder persona. I was just an exhausted, terrified man, drowning in the consequences of his own arrogance. His assets remained completely frozen. He had been forced to rely on a court-appointed public defender after exhausting his remaining borrowed funds on a second-rate defense attorney who quickly realized the case was an absolute lost cause. Nia sat in the gallery a few rows behind him. She wore oversized dark sunglasses and a neutral trench coat, actively trying to avoid the local press, who had followed the dramatic collapse of her influencer lifestyle. She did not look at her husband. She watched the proceedings with the calculating gaze of an opportunist, waiting for the final shoe to drop. The trial was not a battle. It was a methodical, legal slaughter. Harrison's defense attorney tried his absolute best to spin a narrative of a misunderstood visionary. He paced in front of the judge, gesturing frantically. He argued that the fraudulent credit card applications were a simple clerical error, a desperate but ultimately harmless attempt by a loving brother to secure a temporary bridge loan to support his pregnant wife. The defense attempted to paint me as a vindictive, wealthy sister who maliciously entrapped her own flesh and blood over a minor family disagreement. He claimed Harrison always intended to pay the money back. Declan sat beside me in the gallery, his arms crossed over his tailored suit. He let out a low, mocking scoff as the defense attorney concluded his opening remarks. The federal prosecutor, armed entirely with the pristine forensic data Declan and I had packaged for the FBI, stood up. The prosecutor did not pace or raise his voice. He did not need theatrics. I had mathematics and digital receipts. The prosecution projected the financial autopsy on the massive screens in the courtroom. They displayed the exact IP addresses tracing the fraudulent applications directly to Harrison's laptop in my parents' basement. They showed the time-stamped approval codes for the $90,000 in credit. The defense attorney tried to object, claiming circumstantial evidence, but the prosecutor simply moved to their next exhibit. Your Honor, the federal prosecutor stated clearly, the defense claims this was a minor familial misunderstanding. We would like to enter into evidence Government Exhibit C, a direct audio recording of the defendant actively participating in an organized extortion attempt against the victim. The courtroom went dead silent as the prosecutor pressed play. The crystal clear audio from my smartphone filled the federal building. Everyone heard Trent Garrison, the disgraced, disbarred lawyer, threatening me with fake filial responsibility laws. They heard Harrison aggressively demanding I sign away my wealth. And then the ultimate nail in the coffin echoed through the speakers. Nia's sharp, vicious voice hissed through the courtroom, threatening to burn my business to the ground with her social media followers if I did not absorb their $500,000 debt. Harrison closed his eyes and buried his face in his hands. The defense attorney physically slumped in his chair, rubbing his forehead as he realized his entire defense strategy had just been incinerated. The jury did not even try to hide their absolute disgust. The recording proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that Harrison was not a misunderstood brother seeking a temporary loan. He was a malicious, calculating fraudster who actively conspired to extort and ruin a corporate executive. The trial concluded with breathtaking speed. It took the jury less than 2 hours of deliberation to return a guilty verdict on all counts, including aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud. The judge demanded Harrison stand for sentencing. The courtroom held its collective breath as the judge looked down from the bench, his expression radiating pure judicial contempt. Harrison, you have demonstrated a profound lack of remorse and an astonishing level of arrogance, the judge stated, his voice booming across the silent room. You attempted to exploit the financial system, and when you failed, you actively conspired to extort your own sister. The court does not view you as a failed entrepreneur. The court views you as a predatory criminal. The judge banged his gavel. I sentence you to 36 months in a federal penitentiary, followed by 5 years of supervised release and full mandatory financial restitution. Harrison let out a choked gasp, his knees buckling slightly as the federal marshals immediately stepped forward to take him into custody. He looked back toward the gallery, his eyes frantically searching for his wife, searching for anyone to tell him this was just a bad dream. Nia was already gone. The moment the judge read the sentence and confirmed the massive financial restitution attached to his conviction, Nia had quietly stood up, pulled her trench coat tightly around her pregnant belly, and walked out the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. She did not shed a single tear. She did not wave goodbye. She saw a sinking ship, and she ruthlessly severed her final anchor. Exactly 24 hours later, my phone buzzed with an alert from Declan. I opened the encrypted message and smiled. Nia had not wasted a single minute mourning her marriage. She had officially filed for divorce the very next morning at the county courthouse. She cited irreconcilable differences, but the legal filings clearly indicated her primary objective was to sever her legal ties to Harrison's mountain of predatory debt and his federal restitution orders. She legally abandoned him to rot in his prison cell, while she scrambled to salvage whatever pathetic scraps remained of her influencer brand. Harrison was now entirely alone, stripped of his freedom, stripped of his fake wealth, and stripped of the wife he had committed federal crimes to impress. The golden child had finally received his ultimate reward. The devastating collapse of my brother was only the first domino to fall. While Harrison was trading his bespoke designer suits for a standard-issue federal prison uniform, my parents were experiencing a brutal, unforgiving collision with reality. The 60 minutes I had given them on the day of the baby shower had expired exactly on time. The sheriff's deputies did not grant them a single extra second to mourn their shattered social standing. Richard and Patricia were physically escorted off the sweeping driveway of the estate, with nothing but a few hastily packed garbage bags of clothing. The heavy front doors locked behind them, sealing away the luxurious life they had funded through deceit and manipulation. They were left standing on the curb, completely destitute, watching the last of their country club friends speed away in luxury vehicles. Their financial crater was absolute. The predatory shadow lender, who had financed the extravagant baby shower, moved swiftly when the payments immediately defaulted. Because Richard had used fabricated collateral, the lender aggressively seized whatever remaining scraps of value my parents possessed. They pawned Patricia's heavy diamond necklace and Richard's premium watches just to afford a security deposit on a place to live. No reputable bank would approve them for a lease. Their credit scores were entirely scorched earth. They were forced to move into a cramped 400-square-foot studio apartment located directly above a noisy 24-hour commercial laundromat on the absolute worst side of the city. The contrast was staggering. Gone were the vaulted ceilings, the infinity pool, and the manicured gardens. Their new reality consisted of peeling linoleum floors, a single window facing a crumbling brick alleyway, and the constant suffocating smell of industrial bleach seeping up through the floorboards. Survival in the real world requires actual labor, a concept my parents had successfully avoided for years by treating me as their personal banking system. With zero retirement funds and mounting legal fees from their failed attempts to defend Harrison, they had no choice but to enter the workforce at 65 years old. Richard, a man who once commanded living rooms with arrogant authority and smoked premium cigars while boasting about his imaginary wealth, was forced to put on a bright green polyester vest. He took a minimum wage job bagging groceries at a local discount supermarket. For 8 hours a day, he stood on his feet under harsh fluorescent lights. His knees ached constantly, his hands cramped as he loaded canned goods and heavy milk jugs into paper bags for customers who did not even bother to look him in the eye. He was no longer the undisputed patriarch of a wealthy family. He was just an exhausted, invisible elderly man working a high school-level job to afford basic groceries. Patricia faced an even more humiliating fate. The former country club matriarch, who had spent decades looking down her nose at service workers and treating retail staff like indentured servants, was forced to become a cashier at a chain pharmacy. She had to wear a mandated uniform polo shirt and a plastic name tag. She spent her days scanning barcode labels and enduring the impatience of rude customers. The universe possesses a terrifying sense of irony. One Tuesday afternoon, Patricia was working the cash register when a prominent woman from her former country club walked up to the counter to purchase cosmetics. Patricia froze in absolute horror. She tried to lower her head desperately, attempting to hide her face behind the plastic scanning shield. It did not work. The wealthy socialite recognized her immediately. The woman did not offer a warm greeting or ask how Patricia was doing. She simply looked at my mother's faded uniform, gave her a look of profound, devastating pity, took her receipt, and walked out the door without saying a single word. Patricia had to excuse herself to the dingy employee break room, where she suffered a complete hyperventilating breakdown next to a vending machine. The physical exhaustion and the crushing social humiliation quickly stripped away their remaining arrogance. The delusion finally shattered, leaving them alone in their dark, noisy studio apartment with the catastrophic magnitude of their miscalculation. They had sacrificed a highly successful, genuinely loyal daughter to prop up a fraudulent criminal son. They had chosen a fake lifestyle over actual security. The panic of their new miserable existence morphed into a desperate, agonizing need for reconciliation. They had no way to reach me digitally. I had changed all my personal phone numbers the day after the eviction. My corporate email servers were equipped with strict filters that automatically deleted any messages containing their names. The security personnel at my penthouse building and my commercial real estate firm had explicit strict orders to issue immediate trespass warnings and contact the police if Richard or Patricia ever stepped foot on the premises. Their only remaining avenue of communication was the postal service. Every single week without fail, a thick handwritten envelope would arrive at my corporate headquarters. Vanessa, the very receptionist my father had aggressively threatened and screamed at months earlier, was in charge of sorting the incoming mail. She recognized Patricia's frantic, slanted handwriting immediately. Vanessa would walk into my corner office with a quiet, knowing smile and place the tear-stained envelopes perfectly centered on my polished glass desk. I never threw the envelopes away unopened. That would have implied I was afraid of their words. Instead, I established a very specific, highly satisfying routine. I would pick up the envelope. I would slide a silver letter opener through the top seam, pulling out the pages filled with my mother's desperate, shaky cursive. I would unfold the letter and read exactly one single line. My dearest Natalie, please forgive us. We are suffering so much in this awful place. Or another week it would start with, Natalie, your father's back is failing at the grocery store. We are begging you for a second chance to be a real family. I never read the second line. I never absorbed their excuses, their pleading, or their manufactured guilt trips. I would calmly pivot my leather executive chair to the right. I would switch on the heavy-duty industrial paper shredder sitting beside my desk. I would feed the pages directly into the steel blades, watching their desperate weeping apologies get instantly pulverized into tiny illegible strips of paper. The loud, aggressive grinding noise of the machine destroying their attempts at manipulation was the most peaceful therapeutic sound in the entire world to me. It was the sound of absolute finality. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel pity for the aching back of the man who tried to steal my wealth or the social embarrassment of the woman who watched her daughter get verbally abused and did nothing to stop it. I simply turned back to my multi-million-dollar commercial contracts entirely unbothered, leaving them to live out the rest of their days in the exact miserable reality they had meticulously built for themselves. The suburban mansion, the site of their ultimate humiliation, sat completely empty for exactly 3 months. I refused to set foot inside it while it still carried the stench of their fabricated lives. Selling it to another superficial country club family felt entirely counterproductive. I did not want to just flip the property for a quick profit. I wanted to completely overwrite its history and erase the toxic legacy my parents had tried to build. I contacted my top commercial contractors and ordered a massive structural demolition. I parked my car across the street and watched with profound satisfaction as the heavy machinery rolled onto the pristine lawn. The demolition crews ripped out the custom mahogany double doors. They tore down the tacky chandeliers and smashed through the imported marble countertops my mother had purchased using stolen equity. We stripped the house down to the bare wooden studs, removing every single trace of their arrogant, performative wealth. Once the property was entirely gutted, I initiated the rezoning process with the city council. I invested a substantial portion of my commercial capital to execute a complete architectural retrofit. I transformed the toxic monument to my parents' greed into a highly functioning, heavily subsidized commercial incubator, specifically designed for female entrepreneurs. I named it the Vanguard Innovation Hub. The massive formal living room, where my mother had once screamed at me to leave her property, was redesigned into a bright, open-concept collaborative workspace. We installed ergonomic workstations and soundproof privacy pods. The dining room where Harrison had aggressively demanded I finance a luxury vehicle was completely rebuilt into a state-of-the-art executive boardroom equipped with the fastest fiber optic internet in the county. We took the extravagant master suite, the very room where my parents had secretly plotted to steal my inheritance, and converted it into a professional-grade digital media laboratory for content creators who actually possess legitimate talent and real business plans. I established a rigorous application process. I offered premium commercial space at a fraction of the market rate to women who were building real, verifiable businesses from the ground up. I wanted to surround myself with women who worked grueling hours to achieve financial independence. Women who did not rely on family bailouts, predatory loans, or fake social media personas to survive. Within 6 months, the incubator was operating at maximum capacity. The driveway that once hosted a fleet of leased luxury cars for a fake baby shower was now filled with the modest vehicles of determined, hardworking founders. Every single day, real revenue was generated inside those walls. Legitimate tech startups secured angel funding. Graphic design firms landed major corporate contracts. Independent financial advisors built sustainable wealth portfolios. Every milestone these women achieved effectively sanitized the property. The house that was originally designed to drain my bank account and destroy my future was now actively generating generational wealth and absolute financial security for dozens of brilliant women. I had taken the ultimate symbol of my family's failure and weaponized it for female success. It has been 2 years since the day I handed my parents their eviction notice. The dust has completely settled. The legal battles are closed. The severed ties are permanent. I wake up on a crisp Tuesday morning in my downtown penthouse. The early sunlight filters through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, casting long geometric shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The massive space is completely quiet. There are no frantic phone calls from my brother demanding emergency capital. There are no manipulative text messages from my mother playing the victim. There are no unhinged threats from a desperate sister-in-law. I walk into my sleek minimalist kitchen. The marble surfaces are clean and cool to the touch. I press the button on my espresso machine, listening to the rich dark coffee grind and brew. The intense aroma fills the quiet air. I pour the dark liquid into a ceramic mug and walk slowly across the expansive living room. I slide open the heavy glass door and step out onto my private balcony. The morning air is sharp and refreshing. Far below me, the city is waking up. The streets are a grid of moving cars, busy professionals, and endless commercial opportunity. The towering steel and glass skyscrapers reflect the bright morning sun, standing as monuments to ambition and resilience. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. I feel the warmth travel down my chest. I look out over the sprawling city, realizing that I own a significant, highly profitable piece of it. I did not inherit it. I did not steal it. I built it through sheer, unrelenting determination and absolute professional competence. I close my eyes and breathe in the cool air. For the first time in my 33 years of life, my shoulders are completely relaxed. The constant suffocating anxiety of managing a toxic family is entirely gone. The heavy invisible chain they had wrapped around my neck has been permanently shattered. The silence in my penthouse is not lonely. It is not isolating. It is the sound of absolute unbreakable peace. I had to become the ruthless corporate monster they accused me of being just to survive their boundless greed. I had to embrace the role of the unfeeling villain to protect the empire I had built with my own two hands. And looking at the incredible life I have created, I do not regret a single decision. People say blood is thicker than water, but if that blood is toxic, you have to cut off the limb to save your own life. Have you ever had to play the villain to protect yourself from your own family? Drop your story in the comments below. Sometimes losing your family is the only way to find your own.